This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We kick off this Friday's programming with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien joining us for our weekly grain market update. This week, Dan shares insight on futures and cash markets, as well as cost return budgets for those in South Central Kansas. Also ahead, with cattle numbers shrinking across the country, genetics is becoming more and more important in the industry. K-State cow-calf specialist Jason Warner joins us to provide tips on bull selection and management during these challenging times. K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond closes out this week's programming with our agricultural weather report. With Kansas bouncing between winter and spring, the state has seen a wide variety of conditions in the past week, and Chip explains why we can expect for that to continue in the weeks ahead. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Dan O'Brien. He is our K-State grain economist for this week's grain market update. And Dan, we've got a lot to talk through today, so let's go ahead and start off with futures.
Yes, a lot of times in the grain markets, futures especially, February is kind of a docile time. And as far as the price movement of late, it has been sideways a bit, but there's just a lot of underlying news roiling around that can have a major impact. And maybe the impacts of all this, I guess, won't show up till later in March, and April, and May. But so for corn futures, we closed on Wednesday at 670, 6.25, down a little bit, but we had been just basically moving up and down those markets, a little bit of an uptrend, but not a lot. I've been watching these corn futures. They've been at 595 thereabouts and have been up 2.6 and over that. And now we seem to be in almost a psychological position of not wanting to quite go to $6. So 590, 598, something like that. It's just kind of been the range we've been in. So it is as it is in terms of lack of real issues affecting that market. Again, we have been watching the short crop in Argentina. I don't know that that's been fully dealt with yet. Some concerns emerging in southern Brazil. Actually, they had enough rainfall, it's affected their soybean harvest, that they're going to be late planting their second corn crop, which pushes its maturity out into the dry time frame. So, I guess as the economist, I can rationalize a story to think that, gosh, there could be some risk down the road on this. But it's not here right yet in that Brazilian situation. And you look at soybeans, some of the same issues between Brazil, Argentina coming in and affecting us. Still, March closed on Wednesday at 15.25 3/4. An amazing price historically. November, 13.75, also a strong market. So the futures for both corn and soybeans, they're showing their hand, Samantha, in that the upfront new crop bid of 6.76 on corn, fully about 80 cents higher than the projection for the future. So we're anticipating at least somewhat of a better situation down the road. We'll see. We have to actually get that. And for beans, as we just talked about, gosh, the math is large enough. I think it's about $1.50 differential. So in both of those commodities, we're looking at a drop. Still, the soybean corn price ratio still favors corn acres. We'll see what the USDA says next week. If they change their earlier opinion on an increase of about 3.5-4 million acres of corn and sideways for beans, these are pretty high soybean prices. I guess we'll see. And then for wheat, we in Kansas, we're sort of on the front row in terms of what's affecting wheat markets and moisture. As we look out, a lot of us look out our windows, falling in parts of western Kansas. And will that be enough to offset all the damage we had, reduce production potential through the fall and off into the spring, cold temperatures thrown in? So still March closed on Wednesday, 895.5. July, 870. July, September, depending on where you're at, it's kind of the harvest futures contract options that we're seeing. So again, in all of those, as we talk about these, we talk about lack of carrying charge. There's not a positive carrying charge in either corn, soybeans, or wheat anywhere before December. And actually, we're not so concerned about December. There's nothing before July, So we're bidding as high as we can, as strong as we can up front to try to shake any grain out of storage, grain, soybeans, whatever, wheat, for people to use. And still are seeing some pretty tight holders of grain, and guess we'll see where all that goes.
Absolutely. With that in mind, when we think about holding on to grain, what do our current markets look like when we think of our local cash markets?
Well, some interesting trends. Now, of course, my office is out here in northwest Kansas, and as I look out my window, we have snowstorms. Transportation's kind of really it's hard to move grain right now, and I think probably because of that, you've seen a pretty dramatic weakening in grain basis. Again, elevators don't want to take grain in that they can't move out, so what had been not 3 or 4 months ago a basis of $1 over here, just on with snowstorms out the window, dropped to 60 over. In Garden City, again, if we had open transportation, you'd have arbitrage going on. The Garden City bid is $1.25 over, so 62-cent differential. Normally, if the roads were passable, we wouldn't be having that. That's something people take advantage of. But you have a difference of 8.01 in Garden City on Wednesday as opposed to 7.36. And again, my contention would be if we didn't have a snowstorm going on, that we wouldn't have that. So I guess that's just something an ag economist gets all excited about. And really pretty strong bids. It's interesting in Topeka for grain sorghum, the upfront cash bids really jumped to the high side. Topeka and Hutchinson's 7.16 Topeka, 7.26 Hutchinson, 40-50 cent basis levels, stronger than elsewhere in the state. When that starts to happen in that part of the world, I'd kind of suspect, well, hey, they're filling trains or they're doing something export-wise going on. So we'll see if that comes about. And for soybeans, again, strongest bids in the state for beans in Topeka, 17 over at 15.43. That'd be over the March contract. Hutchinson, 9 over. Columbus, 11 over. So again, we've got some crushing plants near some of those areas. Maybe that's that strong demand pull for domestic crush, which has been a great thing. And again, we follow the weekly reports. You and I talk about them, and we continue to have pretty strong soybean exports, and that rain in Brazil delaying their harvest, that affects us in these transitional times, and it seems to be going on. And would also say for wheat, I see what the upfront cash situation is, and kind of watching the forward bids. Suddenly a strong bid shows up in the Salina area. This would be for new crop, 1 cent over. Well, who's got a gap they're trying to fill? So I think farmers with trucks, sounds like a movie title. But anyway, farmers with trucks in Kansas, watch those situations if they have grain in storage and they move to take advantage of them. Of course, this is a new crop bid, and we'll see it. Probably you have people, they look at that bid and they look at their wheat out in the field and they see moisture coming and they feel just a little bit better about actually having a crop to deliver into that.
When it comes to locally, when we're thinking about local markets, we're going to start focusing on some of these regional areas because we've been talking a lot about the economic health of Kansas. So when we think about economic health, something that might come to mind is cost return budgets, right, Dan? And I feel like focusing on the regionality of those differences is kind of important.
Well, yes. We happen to have some activities coming up here in Pawnee County near Larned, dealing with Extension Agent Kyle Grant. And in getting ready for that, we're looking at what some of the local forward contract opportunities are and how those forward contract opportunities for corn, for grain sorghum, for wheat, for soybeans, how they compare to cost return budgets that we put out. So just again, on Wednesday's closes, we've got an estimate of break-even costs for corn, both irrigated and center pivot, about total cost about $442 to $475. New crop bids for corn in that area running $585 to $6. Of course, we're in February. There's not one kernel of corn planted in Pawnee County. And there won't be for another probably at least 45 to 60 days. So, but yet here we are with, I guess, a situation that doesn't always present itself. That's that we can cover full economic costs and actually have a profit on top of that. So that's a great thing. For grain sorghum cost production, again, around, if we're looking at irrigation at 160 bushel an acre, around $5 plus. On non-irrigated, more like a number low enough that I'm afraid to even say it, that I have to go back and check, but more closer to 4. And new crop bids for grain sorghum just marginally lower than for corn. Again, as we talked about the profitability of corn, we have top bids $585 to $6 for corn. We have bids of $545 to $560 for sorghum, and those are profitable if you're talking $450 break evens. And just quickly then for wheat, non-irrigated wheat in the south central Kansas where Larned, Pratt, St. John's, a whole bunch of places like that, Hutchinson would be. We're looking at a break-even cost of $6.32, which in past years would just be paralyzing. But given where the markets are at now, we have new crop forward contract bids, $8.30 to $8.35. So again, $2 over cost production. The issue is you have to raise the bushels. That's the thing that would make people cautious about that. And then finally, South Central Kansas, pretty good representation for soybeans and the break-even costs. When you look at the costs, if you have this historic filter that I've had, thinking, gosh, $8, $9, $10 is a lot. Well, the costs are $10.20 to $10.90. That in past years would be jaw-dropping. But the new crop forward contract bids now, based off that November contract, $12.85, $12.90. So $1.50, $2 over cost. So it's quite the time we're in. I don't think anybody would disagree with the idea that, hey, there's a lot of economic risk going on in the U.S. economy, but in Kansas agriculture all over. And with all that risk and all that uncertainty, with nothing planted for these other crops and wheat that we're unsure of, man, we've got some great forward pricing opportunities. If a person does enter into forward pricing, and we've been talking about this in some of our Winning the Game grain marketing workshops, myself and Mark Nelson with Farm Bureau and Rich Llewellyn, we try to work through a reasonable plan to, in a sequential manner, make sure that we're not losing out on some of these pre-harvest opportunities. So I think we can be empathetic for the conundrum that people have and that, yeah, they know these prices are great. How much at this stage do they put on the line with the commitment to try to take advantage of it?
Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Samantha. Take care.
You as well. Once again, everyone, that was Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, joining us for our grain market update for the week. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by K-State cow-calf specialist Jason Warner for a conversation on bull selection and management. So, Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Samantha, it's good to be here. How are you?
Good. Things are going well. It's a bit cold, but I'm looking forward to spring.
We're one day closer every day.
Birds were chirping this morning. That's always a great sign.
It's a nice sign, and we're getting into that time of year where a lot of spring calving producers are really starting to gear up with their calving season, and we're kind of in the swing of bull sale season, or at least it's going to be right around the corner. A lot of good, exciting things going on this time of year for sure.
Absolutely, which is why this topic is so timely, right? Bull selection and management. It's something that's on the minds of many producers potentially. Setting up this conversation as we go forward, why is bull selection so important right now specifically?
Well, I think when you really take a look at it, you got to keep in mind that bulls and the genetics that they provide for one's cow herd really are an investment, and they need to be viewed as an investment. And the thing to keep in mind as well, too, is that over time, we've seen that bulls have generally become more expensive. And so as that has happened, we see that our breeding cost on a per cow exposed basis has gone up over time. And so, really from the standpoint of keeping cost economical, we want to try to spread those costs out as much as we can over time. And we know that we're going to try, or at least our goal is to try to maximize the productive years of service that we get out of those bulls and understand that they're going to have a significant impact on our cow herd for a number of years.
So when we think about producers as they go into making these decisions, what are some key things to keep in mind going into a sale, for example?
The big thing that I think about as I visit with producers that is really important when you're making the decision on which bull that you're going to purchase and how you're going to bring those genetics into your cow herd is really starting with a plan and understanding what the goals are that you have for your operation and being able to go back and look at it and say, have I met those goals, or what changes or things do I need to implement in order to achieve them? And that's where, of course, record keeping is really important when we think about measuring our performance variables there. And that's really important even for commercial cow-calf producers. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're placing emphasis on the traits that are going to have the biggest impact or the most direct impact on what your economic value is or what your revenue stream is for your operation. And oftentimes I think that when we look at the amount of information that's available for commercial producers today, when you think about opening opening up a bull sale catalog. There's a tremendous amount of information there, so it's important to be able to work through that information and understand how that information directly relates to your operation and making sure that you're making an informed decision in that manner. Another consideration that I think is important for producers to always keep in mind is that in addition to starting to plan well in advance of the sale date in terms of looking at the sale catalog and identifying which potential bulls are going to be a good fit for your operation, it's really important to make a good list. Have several bulls identified that you think based on genetically what they can provide for you and how those bulls look phenotypically that they can be a good fit, but have multiple bulls identified, and it's a great opportunity to maybe have some initial conversations with your seed stock provider prior to the sale to utilize them to be able to help you identify some bulls that are going to be a good fit for your operation based on the genetic base of your cow herd and what your goals and objectives are. And it's always a good idea to have multiple potential bulls identified prior to the start of the sale and have a budget. Have a budget identified in terms of how much money that you're willing to spend on each one of those bulls as you go in, and have that really well identified and outlined prior to the start of the sale. And then that way, if you get caught up in the sale and maybe you've got 2 or 3 bulls identified and they go for more money than what you're willing to spend, if you've got some additional bulls identified that you can make sure that you can come back and fall back to and potentially purchase those at a price in line with what your budget is, I think that helps. That's going to help the commercial producer from purchasing a bull that's not necessarily going to be a good fit for your operation and spending more money on it than what you would like to do, and that's going to help you make sure that you find a bull that's going to be a good fit for you, because I think at the end of the day, the last thing that any seed stock producer wants to do is sell a bull to a commercial producer or to a customer that may not necessarily be a good fit for their operation. And so they want to make sure that we're developing a good relationship there and working with your seed stock provider to have them guide you in that process and in that decision-making process.
Absolutely, making the most of those relationships. Great advice. It's wonderful that we have all of that genetic information, but it's overwhelming. So is there things that you think get lost sometimes or overlooked in some cases?
I think for a lot of producers, one of the challenges that we still run into is that oftentimes I think producers can get a little bit caught up or hung up on looking at actual performance data when they think about buying bulls relative to looking at EPDs. And, particularly when we think about things like birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, those are very important measurements from the standpoint it does give us an indication of that individual animal's performance, but that doesn't always necessarily translate to what the expected genetic performance or the expected genetic change that individual is going to be able to provide for us. And so I think a lot of producers still, we maybe place a little bit more emphasis on that than what we should. And it's always important to come back to the things that really are going to give us the best indication or the best probability of genetic change there. And that's where EPDs, of course, come into play. And I think also at the same time, too, when we're thinking about making genetic selection decisions and buying bulls at this time of year, it's a balanced package, right? We got to make sure that we're looking at not only the genetic component of those animals, and we're thinking about the EPDs and making sure that we're understanding what those animals are genetically on paper, but things like fleshing ability, structural soundness, and correctness, those, of course, are extremely important, and we got to make sure that we're taking a balanced approach there and looking at the overall picture and making sure that we're finding a bull that's going to be a good fit for our operation.
Knowing your operation and making decisions accordingly, that's really where EPDs come in, like you mentioned, and they make for a great genetic selection tool, but it does require a bit more work with those, right?
That's right. So EPDs really are the most accurate tool that we have that tell us what the genetic change or the genetic progress is going to be of an individual animal when we go to purchase that animal or make the decision to bring that animal into our cow herd. The nice thing about EPDs, or the thing that we have to keep in mind with EPDs, is that they are going to be expressed relative to a breed average or relative to a base average, and we have to be able to use them to compare individual animals within a breed or within a data set. And so it's the relative difference, it's the relative performance difference from one animal to the next when those two animals are going to be mated to the same set of cows or the same set of heifers. It's the relative difference in change there. So it doesn't always necessarily show or predict an actual level of performance, but it's a relative difference between two sires. Of course, that breed average value for all those EPDs, all those traits that are reported, those change on a yearly basis. And the other thing to keep in mind with that as well, too, is that most breed associations now and most seed stock producers, most most of the EPDs that they're going to report are going to be what we would call genomically enhanced EPDs and increase the accuracy of that EPD value.
And when it comes to producers making these final decisions, I know we've already touched on kind of key things to consider, but for this time of year specifically, when we think about we've been in a long-term drought, there's been low forage supplies, adding into your herd now, it's more of an investment than ever, right?
It really is. And I think that there's going to be opportunities when we look at some of the dynamics and some of the changes that have happened throughout particularly the cow-calf segment of the cattle industry over the last year and a half, where we're going to be working with the lower cattle inventory going forward. The question always is what does that mean for the value of feeder calves and the value of females that we're going to have in our system? And so I really think that now is a tremendous opportunity for producers to be really making some proactive decisions and bringing some high-quality genetics into their cow herds. At the same time, when you make the decision to purchase a bull and bring that bull into your operation, what approaches that we can take to maximize the years of productive service that we can get out of that bull, making sure that we're managing those bulls appropriately, particularly young bulls, after they get through that first breeding season. Those yearling bulls, if they're aggressive breeders and they're doing a nice job of covering cows and breeding cows, that's a good thing for us, but we don't want those bulls to get to the point where they're starting to lose so much condition that they lose muscle mass. So we go later on in the later part of the winter, early part of the spring, really be studying your herd bulls for body condition and understanding where they are, and if you need to be making some last-minute supplementation or feeding changes to those bulls to make sure that they're at a good body condition, preferably a 5 or a 6 coming into the start of the breeding season. Now's a good time to be doing that. And also at the same time, too, it's a great time to be thinking about getting your breeding soundness exams scheduled with your veterinarian and getting that done.
So when it comes to programs surrounding bull management, I know K-State has some upcoming events that might be beneficial for producers, right?
Well, one thing we just want to remind folks of is that in conjunction with our annual Cattlemen's Day event, the 46th annual KSU Legacy Bull and Female Sale will be held Friday, March 4th at 4 p.m. at the Stanley Stout Center here on campus in Manhattan. And so just as a quick reminder for folks, the sale is put on by the Livestock Sales Management class and hosted by the Purebred Beef Cattle Unit. And really, it provides an opportunity to not only showcase and highlight the high-quality genetics that we have that the university has developed, but also to highlight the work that our students have put into this sale. And really, it's about them and them developing skills and learn about the seed stock side of the industry and understand that component of it. And so it's a great opportunity to highlight the work that our students have put into it. And just as a reminder, there will be an offering of Angus, Simmental, and Hereford bulls, as well as bred females and some commercial open heifers, as well as a few AQHA ranch horses that will be offered for sale as well, too. So everyone is invited to attend. We hope everyone can join us. And if you're not able to attend that day, keep in mind that the sale will be broadcast online on CCI Live. And we certainly appreciate everyone's support and partnership with our program.
Great event that you will not want to miss out on. But Jason, thanks so much for joining us today and for all this information you've shared.
Very good. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was K-State cow-calf specialist Jason Warner joining us for a discussion on bull management and selection this year. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are ending this week's programming with our agricultural weather report, and joining us for that this week is Chip Redmond, our K-State meteorologist. So, Chip, thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. A kind of tumultuous week in terms of weather that we saw the whole spectrum, I guess.
Yeah, a little introduction to spring. We're kind of transitioning to that part where we're in the back half of winter. Our average temperatures are warming every day, and our average precipitation is gradually increasing as well. And that was a great example of what happened this week, where we had warm temperatures to start out the week and over the weekend, and then we obviously cooled off midweek. And with that warm temperatures, we had a one storm system that brought moisture in the form of rain and thunderstorms even. Their first real good thunderstorms in Kansas this year. And then the second system later in that week brought snow and some rain as well to the far southeast. But brought more widespread snow. So a taste of spring, but we were reminded that it is still February.
And the snow that we saw in areas of the state, impactful in some cases or no?
Yeah, northwest Kansas definitely got the most snow. And then the band of heaviest snow was just north of the Nebraska border. And unfortunately didn't put snow in the regions that need it the most or haven't seen the most, like Wichita to Kansas City and to Manhattan. That area corridor just keeps missing event after event. And, looking at just even the Manhattan snowfall, we got a little bit, but that only bumps us up to about the third least snowiest winter if we were to end it right now. So some very low snow amounts despite the moisture. I mean, we've gotten a lot of moisture overall. We're well above normal. We can pretty much go almost to the end of March now without any precipitation and still be average for the year. So we're doing really well moisture-wise, especially in the eastern half of the state. Central, there's definitely a gradient there, kind of along that 81 corridor. But when you get further west and southwest, especially south of I-70 west to 81, that area has really missed most of moisture and still some big deficits. And even though we average little amounts of precipitation this time of year, we're still building onto those deficits. And they need moisture to try to get the wheat out of the ground in places where it's still in the seed.
Yeah, that timeline is fast approaching in terms of when we'll start seeing wheat popping up more and more again.
Yeah, and hopefully as we get into spring, we can get some of that moisture further west and south and help that wheat along. But that's also the region where subsurface soil moisture is the least. It's very, very dry soil still out there. And unfortunately, a little bit of moisture to get it out of the ground isn't going to cut it. They need more long-term moisture that's going to be beneficial, which is another reason why the snow event was kind of a bummer for some of those areas, because that snow would help that moisture get in the ground a little bit more than, say, like a heavy rain would that would run off.
And now that we've had the snow in areas of the state, and of course with that was cooler temperatures, now we're expecting to warm back up again a little bit?
Yeah, we'll just keep riding that roller coaster. Really, really active weather pattern right now. And it's going to bring some more moisture to the west, but there's a lot of cold to our west and north. But Kansas is kind of on that gradient where we're gonna push that warm air north, and we're going to get it into Kansas for the weekend with some breezy southwesterly winds. And then as we get into midweek next week, we'll have another system. It looks fairly dry at this point. That'll bring that cooler air further south, and we'll shift that battleground area to our south and bring that cold air in to likely finish out the month.
So just kind of trying to figure out where we're at weather-wise. Are we in winter or are we in spring yet?
We're in Kansas winter, which is just the typical ebbs and flows of the season. I mean, we're in that battleground, and we're enhanced by that La Nina. We're enhanced by that negative Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which has weakened some over the last month, and I think that's part of the reason we're starting to see some of that cold air come back southward again.
Absolutely. And in terms of improvements in the drought monitor, any optimism there?
Yeah, with that moisture we talked about already, and especially in eastern Kansas, there's definite drought improvement with categorical improvements in the eastern quarter of the state.
Great update for sure, Chip. Like we said, tumultuous week weather-wise, and it sounds like the rest of the month will be the same.
As we get into spring, you got to expect it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining us today, Chip. We appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond joining us for this week's Agricultural Weather Report. That concludes this week's programming. We'll be back with more on Monday on Agriculture Today.